Hello everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today's going to be a little reading wrap up, going through like my general experience with reading in 2025. There's going to be three portions of this video. We're going to have an intro, kind of general talking through of what my reading year was like. Then we're going to go through some of the stats that I've collected through my reading spreadsheet. And lastly, we're going to talk about my favorite books of the year. I decided to do the favorite books in conjunction with this video this year, since I'm actually going to put my goals for 2026 with my yearly TBR. I think that video might already be out by the time this one comes out. If not, it'll be right after. Anyway, with that intro out of the way, let's get into the meat of the video. So starting off, my kind of like intro thesis is the fact that I didn't read that much this year, and that's okay. I have a lot of reasons for why I read less this year. And by less, I should clarify, I did read 46 books, including one DNF. But compared to my stats from 2024, my reading was like almost half of what I did in the previous year. The main reason was just the fact that I kind of consumed a lot of other forms of media over books. I spent a lot of time watching movies and TV shows. I honestly feel like in this last year, I've gone to the movies way more than I ever have before. We also went to 6 different theater shows, which also might be the most I've done in a single year. And the reason why I've kind of gravitated towards movies and TV shows is that they're kind of like a bonding activity I can do with my wife. Since we do have pretty different book tastes, we don't really have a lot of overlap in the things we read, but we pretty much almost always watch movies together. So I've kind of used watching movies and TV shows as a way to prioritize spending time with her. I also feel like, and this is something I've said, I feel like in 100 other videos now, but 2025 was just like kind of a really bad year for me. I wasn't really focused on a lot of other things when the beginning part of the year when our cat George was still sick, and then obviously he passed away in April. And that was just like a really, really hard time for us. I also had a lot of changes that kind of like ebbed and flowed with my work life, and that kind of like really took up a lot of my mental energy. And also somewhat overall, I feel like I was a little bit adrift in terms of like what I wanted to focus and spend my time on. Kind of like mixing in my other hobbies of books, movies, journaling, and sewing. So books just like kind of weren't as high a priority for me this year as they have been in the previous years. So that's kind of like my general thought process for why I didn't read as much this year as I have in the past. I'm hoping that in 2026 I can get my spark back in terms of reading. There honestly are a ton of books on my physical TBR that I'm super excited to read, and also videos that I'm really excited to make in relation to all of those books. So I hope that will be a good level of motivation to get me back into reading more. Okay, for the next portion of this video, let's go through my stats for 2025. For reference, the spreadsheet that I use is originally from Hardback Hoarder. I believe it's on her Etsy. If it's still there, I'll try and remember to link it down below. I've used her spreadsheet, I believe, for the last like 3 to 4 years now. And I'm just going to update all the information and reuse it for 2026. Since I like this format, I feel like I know what tabs I use the most and like what are actually helpful for me. So I've kind of like customized it a little bit more to suit my own needs. But I really, really highly recommend it, and it's only like $5 on Etsy. Okay, it's going off my dashboard. I have 46 books read. This does include, I believe, one DNF. For pages read, I have 8,386. For hours listened, I have 214.75. I have no rereads for this year. In terms of books acquired, there's 34. However, in the way that I use the transactions tab, I will sometimes put like multiple books in one line if it's stuff that I got from like a library bag sale. So there's actually a lot more than 34 books that I bought this year. And lastly, for my yearly TBR, I read 17 out of the 25 books that I had on that list. Okay, now let's look at the genre breakdown. The highest category, kind of no surprise, is romance with 16 books, and that is 36%. And the next highest is fantasy with 12 books, and that is 27%. Next category that I find really interesting is the audience. So that's, is it adult, new adult, YA, or middle grade? For me, 2/3 of the books I read this year were adult. Then I had 12 that were young adult, and then 3 that were new adult. I'm pretty sure the only ones that are new adult is what I use to categorize Heaven Official's Blessing, since it kind of, I feel like, falls in between the two, given the fact that our main character, Xilian, is 19. Okay, next category that I find really, really interesting is the formatting. And it's really, like, honestly, pretty evenly split. For this year, both audiobook alone as well as like a mixture of different formats are both 15 books. Then we have 9 books that I read exclusively physically, and 6 books I read exclusively as ebooks. I feel like this is very different from 2024 because that year, the largest category was actually physical with 28 books and 35%. Whereas for 2025, it's basically 33% for mixture and 33% for audiobook. And then the last third is split between physical and ebook. I guess I just haven't been sitting down to read as much, or I tend to, when I categorize mixture, it's not necessarily like a 50-50 split. It can be a case where I've read in majority as one category, and then maybe 1 or 2 times when I picked up the book, it's been the other format. So maybe there are more books that I read physically and just on occasion listen to the audiobook, but I do feel like that's a little bit accurate. I just haven't had as much time at home sitting down to read physical books. I've been really prioritizing listening to audiobooks, or if I'm listening to an audiobook, maybe on occasion I'll read the physical book if I own it, which is probably why the mixture category has gone up. It just seems like last year I was kind of sticking to one particular method of reading, and this year I kind of mixed around it a little bit more. Okay, the last thing I think I want to look at is actually the publication date, because I find this pretty interesting. This year I feel like I was really split. Like, there wasn't a ton of new releases that I was actively going out of my way to read. I still ended up reading 9 books that came out in 2025, and then it's pretty even with the previous years, where for 2023 I also read 9 books, and then 2024, so new releases from last year, I read 7 of those. And then if we look at the categories from last year's spreadsheet, I read 15 new releases from 2024, and then for like the previous year's new releases, I read 20. And then 2022 is even like a smaller sliver than 2019 for some reason. I feel like maybe in 2024 I was more so like solidifying my place in my booktube channel, and I was kind of like playing catch up, reading a lot of the new releases that had come out from the year before that I didn't get to. Whereas this year, I guess I was reading some books that came out last year that I was still interested in, but I feel like I wasn't super focused on if a book was a new release or really relevant or anything like that. I just was kind of reading books that were in my radar, which kind of happened to be, you know, collectively from the last 5 years or so. Okay, so those are all the stats I wanted to talk about. Now let's move into talking about my favorite books from 2025. I only have 7 books that I gave 5 stars this year, so those are the books I'm going to be talking about in this video. Okay, I think let's start off by talking about the 2 nonfiction books I have on this list. The first one is the only one that's technically like not rated, but it's basically become a favorite of mine. I tend not to rate memoirs because it's like, who am I to really judge someone else's life? But I really did enjoy this book, and that is, of course, The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero and Tom Bissell. This is a nonfiction memoir about the making of The Room, widely held as one of the like worst films ever made. But it's also kind of like a larger story about the author, Greg Sestero, who was best friends with Tommy Wiseau, his like upbringing and his like attempts to break it into Hollywood, how he first like met Tommy Wiseau and his involvement in the creation of The Room. I thought this book was so good. I also really liked the audiobook that Greg Sestero narrates. I think it's really great when obviously in a memoir the author can narrate their own story. I feel like this book really focused a lot on Greg's life story and how like kind of nothing is really guaranteed in Hollywood. And a lot of fame really just like hinges on being at the right place at the right time. I feel like the whole storyline related to The Room really like asks the question of what makes art bad, and can art really like be considered bad if it like comes from a very genuine place? I'm not even that much of a like Room stan. I've only ever seen it for the first time in its entirety this year, but this book honestly gave me even a like greater attachment to it. I just thought it was really good. Okay, the other nonfiction book that I read this year that I gave 5 stars was The Revenge of Analog by David Sachs. This is a nonfiction book that obviously focuses, from the title, on the revenge of analog. The first half, it's talking about analog objects, so film, board games, paper, records. And the second half is about analog ideas, like the concepts of retail, work, and school. I really love this book. It totally blew me away. I thought it was so well researched and came at things from a very much like investigative journalism stance, preachy or fearmongery. And overall, I feel like I left with an even greater appreciation and respect for analog, even having loved the concept already. This book also came out in 2016, and I feel like it is still so relevant even like 10 years later, as obviously the world has become even more entrenched in digital, but we still have a very strong analog counterculture. I do think that there maybe, at least in this book, has a little bit more like optimism in terms of like digital spaces when it came out from research done back in like 2015 that feels leagues away from the world we live in now. But I feel like there's a lot of other things in this that have been like justified with time. Definitely one of the favorite chapters of mine was the school chapter, was talking about the idea of how people really wanted to get more and more digital technology into classrooms and how they thought that would be the secret to helping students learn better. And, you know, eventually students will just be able to like learn entirely from their laptops and they won't even have to go into schools. And obviously we have 2020 and like lockdown to show that that is not actually a good way for students to learn. And the most important thing a student needs to actually succeed is having a good teacher. I really like that chapter and honestly feel like gave me even more respect for all of the teachers and the faculty that I know in my life. Okay, now let's move into all the fiction books that I read and gave 5 stars this year. I'm going to start off with the one book that I do not own because I believe this book was only ever released as an ebook. This pains me so much because I wish I could own this entire series. Anyway, the book I'm talking about is Wonderstruck by Ali Theron. This is the third and final book in the Magic in Manhattan trilogy. This is an fantasy historical romance that is set in Prohibition-era New York City. The main characters are Arthur and Rory. Our main character, Rory, is a type of paranormal that when he touches objects, he can see their history. And Arthur is just like a regular guy who happens to be friends with a couple different paranormals. And they have been working to seal these like really magical, powerful artifacts from this evil villain who obviously like once he gets the artifacts is hoping to use them to take over the world. When they first meet, Rory very much like doesn't want anything to do with them. He just wants to like live his life and kind of avoid the fact that he has magical powers as much as possible. But obviously for the course of the books, they start working together and fall in love. In this third final book, I really, really loved all of the relationship developments that we got with the main couple. I also really loved just like the overall flow and how action-packed the story was. I feel like we got a lot of like really good character development and like closure on some of the like romantic issues that the two had been going through in the previous books. And my heart was like overflowing with how like tender some of those scenes were. I feel like by the end of this book, you can really see like just how much the main couple has grown, seeing how cute they are in the relationship and how good for each other they are. I also really love this book because there is a side character, Lord Fine, who I really, really loved. We met him in the second book in the series, and he did show up a little bit for the third book. I wish he was in it a little bit more, but I do believe that his storyline in this book is leading into the spin-off series where he and this other character are the main romance, and I'm so excited to get into reading that spin-off series. Okay, moving right along, let's talk about 2 books that are part of the same series, and I gave both of them 5 stars when I actually read them in a reading vlog, and that is The Last Sun and The Hourglass Throne. This is books 1 and 3 in the Tarot Sequence series by Katie Edwards. This is an adult urban fantasy romance series with a queer normative world. I do think the romance element is a little light. It's mostly just an urban fantasy, but I loved these books so much. I think of the 2 of them, my like all-time favorite is definitely going to be the first one, The Last Sun. It follows our main character, Rune St. John, who as a teenager, his entire family and court was killed, and him and his bodyguard Brand were the only 2 survivors. And he has basically been on a like revenge mission for the last like 15 years, gathering information about these people that had killed his family, while at the same time he was like taken in by another one of the royal courts and has kind of been working as a like investigator, hitman type of job, doing dirty work for them. For the plot of like the first book, he is working to try and find a missing heir of another noble house, and it's kind of like stumbles into a larger evil plot. The overarching plot and kind of like Rune's overall goal has only slowly been building up over the course of the 3 books that are out. But I really, really love this series. I love Rune as the main character. He's very much my type of boy. I love a man who is like super traumatized but then hides that with humor. I love his relationship with Brand. I think they are so funny and so perfect together. I love a relationship that has like 6 different things going on. Like they're not even really romantic. It's much more platonic plus like some other stuff going on. And I just like really love their devotion to each other and the way they interact. This book was really great. I thought it was a great start to the series. And then some of the like really intense revelations and dramatic moments in this one made me like love it even more. I really, really love this series. Definitely check the trigger warnings because there is some pretty heavy stuff that is talked about in the first one. But overall, I really, really love the series. I am waiting with bated breath for the 4th book to come out in 2026. Okay, the next book I have here is actually one of the first books I started in 2025. And I think it actually was also my first 5-star of the year. That is The Scottish Boy by Alex de Campi. This book is so insane, it's almost hard to really talk about it. It's also amazing as much as it is insane. This is a historical romance set in the 1300s in England. It follows our main character Harry, who is kind of a poorer knight. He goes on this like secret mission with a group of other knights and ends up capturing this Scottish boy. He's then forced to take the Scottish boy Ian back to his like home territory. And at first they are very obviously like antagonistic against each other. Harry's just trying to keep this boy alive. Ian is trying to break out at any moment he can. But slowly they start to become friends. Harry starts to like learn more about who the Scottish boy really is and like why it's so important that he has him. And as part of their bonding, Ian becomes Harry's squire. They start training in tournaments together and obviously falling in love. This book is so insane. It is like so explicit, both in the smut that's in here, but also in the violence, which I feel like makes me respect it more. It's just very much like not going to pull any punches with any of the stuff that's going on. Obviously, you do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, but I feel like even in the more like over-the-top parts, there would be something tender or funny that would like pull me back in and keep me engaged while I was reading. I also have to mention it because I think it's a very funny kind of like anecdote and element of the story, but this book is actually reworked Stucky fanfiction, and I love that. I think that's so funny. Not even a ship that I really care about that much on its own, but I honestly will always support the girls that turn their fanfics into published works. And this one actually turned out to be really, really good. Okay, the last book that I have to talk about for this video is a book that I read both the first and second book in the series this year, back to back, because I was that obsessed with them. And the second book of the series, I ended up giving 5 stars. That book is Dark Air by C.S. Pacat. This is a YA fantasy historical romance series. I'd say the historical is kind of light, it's just sort of like background stuff, and the majority of it is just like a fantasy romance. But it follows our main character, Will. He is on the run after the death of his mother. Pretty early on, he ends up learning that he's part of the bloodline of these like warriors of light that are trying to stop the reincarnation of this great evil Dark Lord from coming about. And they think he is like the only one that will be able to save them. So he ends up going with them and like training alongside them so that he will be strong enough to stop the Dark Lord when they come back. However, this series in its entirety is very much a like pastiche on typical Chosen One tropes. There's a moment in the first book when you think there's going to be this like big heroic moment where they're going to be able to like save this one character who's been imprisoned, and then you realize, oh no, this is like bad end. Everything is going wrong. There's like no hope left. And I don't really want to spoil like one of the other like main elements, but it creates like so much drama, so many more like layers to the story in how you see the main characters and how Will is also very much a unreliable narrator. I really loved the first one. I do think it took me a little while to get into it, and I wasn't the hugest fan of maybe like the first fourth of the book, which is why it's only a 4.5 and out of 5 stars. But this one was so iconic. I also really love the kind of like side queer romance that's developing between Will and James. They have the most like insane scenes together, both in the first and the second books, and I like can't wait to see what developments in the relationship happen for the third book in the series. The third book, hopefully, will be coming out sometime in 2026. We don't have a title, we don't have a release date or anything, but I do believe it's still being edited and like in like the final stages before it like gets announced when the release date will be. And I'm just like so excited to see what the finale of this trilogy is like, because there is so much stuff that's going on and still so much more that can be said in this story. So yes, I really love this series. Definitely probably my favorite of the YA books that I read this year. So those are all of my favorite books from 2025, and that is going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider liking, commenting, or subscribing if you aren't already. Consider following me on the Storygraph if you'd like to see my reading updates in real time, as well as on my Bookstagram, which are both linked in the description. Thank you so much for being patient with me, as I've had a little bit of a delay in a lot of my like end of the year videos coming out into January. I just had a lot of stuff going on, so I didn't have as much time to edit and film in December as I usually do. Hopefully you're okay with that and you're enjoying the videos that are coming out now. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking. Thank you guys as always so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!